And welcome to another episode of Social Workers Matter. It's been a little while. I've had a little bit of a break. Sometimes you need a break just to keep yourself together, really. So I hope everyone enjoyed their bank holiday. As you know, Social Workers Matter is a podcast. I'm Dr. Sylvia Smith, the host, and we often have wonderful guests join us to share their stories, their interests, and possibly some messages that they may want to convey. And today, I have the wonderful Dave Jackson joining me. He and I met online through another event that he was a guest on and I was attending. And I was very, very taken by what he had to say and thought, I wonder if he'd fancy coming on Social Workers Matter. And here he is. Hi, Dave. How are you?
Hello. I am absolutely fine at the moment.
Yeah.
A nice weekend. So all good.
Do you kind of feel relaxed and serene and all the rest of it?
I never feel relaxed and serene unless I'm actually asleep. But
oh wow! Oh God! All right. Okay. Well, Dave's got quite a story to tell. He's written a book, which we're going to talk about. But Dave, I just really wanted you to start really just to share with us what it is you do now. You're an author as well, of course, but what it is you do now, and then go back as far as you want to about your life. That's a huge one, isn't it? But let's start with what you do now, because I think what you do now is quite interesting, aside from the writing.
Yeah. Well, I do a multitude of things actually. My main occupation at the moment is I work in the nuclear industry. I've worked sort of pretty much around Europe in the nuclear sector, decommissioning power stations. So I help along those lines with the planning and implementation of plans and all that kind of stuff. And then sort of prior to that, well, I've done all sorts of things. I mean, I've served in the army, I've served in the fire service, I've been a chauffeur, I've worked in shops, I've done a whole host of things to ensure that the money keeps rolling in and there's bread on the table, basically. But I'm quite gainfully employed, shall I say. I make a
that's good to know.
I'm quite happy, yeah. And in between all that, as you identified, I've written a book. I do a reasonable amount of speaking at social work events, universities, etc., which is just all about really imparting some of the knowledge and experience of living in that sector, the social work sector, the social care sector, and the years spent there, and hopefully helping in some small way, I guess, to kind of educate the social workers and the carers and the students, etc., of the present and the future. So it's a worthwhile task. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm really grateful that you agreed to do this, but I'm also probably going to ask you to do a little bit more when we can arrange things, because I do think obviously what you have to say is really important. Interesting to hear you've had so many different sort of careers, and in a way, I mean, does that for you feel quite satisfying that you've managed to do all these things, or do you feel
I think it goes
out of necessity? Or
I think it's not so much out of necessity. I think it's due to a perspective in life which I have, which we've all seen it, where we've perhaps got a friend who's an electrician and they're out of work, and all they're doing is looking for electrician jobs. And I don't have that perspective. I have a perspective that basically I can do anything. So if I'm looking for work, then I'm looking at anything. And as long as I feel internally that I'm capable of doing that, I'll just go and apply for it. So I think that basically, is what's led me into the army. It's what's led me into the fire service. It's what's led me to writing books. It led me to join the nuclear industry, which I knew absolutely nothing about 25 years ago, when I kind of stepped into it. I literally had a conversation with somebody who basically said, yeah, well, the nuclear industry isn't full of nuclear professionals as such. There's nobody out there who individually can build or decommission a power station. But what we have got is a lot of clever people who can sit around the table and work it all out between them. I kind of just thought, well, I can do that. That's not difficult, is it? Everybody's taking something to the table. So I had to go, and 25 years later or so, I've kind of traveled all over Europe. I've worked in Paris, I've worked in Rotterdam, I've worked in Finland, I've worked in Denmark, I've worked in Switzerland, I've worked top and bottom in the UK. And I kind of like it, I just go out there and I just do my thing. And if my thing is no longer good enough at any point, they can just let me know and I'll just go and do something else that I think I can do.
Well, I mean, before we get into the meat and potatoes of our discussions, I think even in what you've just said, there's a lot of wisdom. And for folks who may be listening who have any sort of concerns about their own ability and so on, I mean, take inspiration from what David said, curiosity, I think, is the major thing, isn't it, really? The curiosity to kind of want to learn.
And I think it's more about just not putting yourself in a box. People have, the average person is an intelligent individual, and you can probably turn your hand to many, many things that you've never really considered. And you allow yourself to be told that you're a project manager, or you're a nurse, or you're a scaffolder, or you're a builder, or whatever. And like I say, I just have the kind of mentality that that's what I am today. But if I need to be something else tomorrow, it's a little bit like the Mr. Ben thing that you used to watch as a kid when he went into the clothes shop and came out as something else. And I think that's probably where it came from, like Mr. Ben.
Yeah.
You have to be of a certain age to understand what Mr. Ben was, but if you Google it, you'll find out.
You'll find out, yeah.
Yeah. So
no, that's fantastic, and I absolutely resonate with that approach and that those ideas. So I've just started reading your book, Dave. So I'm very much reading about the happy period of your life.
Oh, the first chapter.
Yeah. And when you're sort of reading, you think, oh God, you know what's going to come, but I'm enjoying I'm reading to the fullness and taking it all in. It's also reminding me a bit of my own childhood in terms of the local characters and what have. So I'm really, really embracing all of that, because I have a strong feeling it's not going to stay there. But
it's a little bit like those American comedy films where they have all the cheerleaders going to the party, and it all looks like it's great fun, but there's a serial killer in the cellar waiting, and it's a little bit like that, isn't it?
Precisely. And it's my current bedtime reading, and as I say, I'm absolutely immersing myself into the joy of what you start by telling us. But I mean, in terms of your background, before we get into some of the other material, tell us a bit about your background, because you start the story from a particular place, but why did you not go further back? Or do you go further back as the story progresses? Or
well, it does, in a way. It kind of, I guess the first two main chapters are done the wrong way round, which I did on purpose. So it kind of starts with the good stuff, I guess.
Okay. I don't necessarily want you to give too many spoilers away.
Actually. No, it's not a lot of spoilers in there, but then it kind of jumps back to how this good thing came about, and then moves out to say how it was kind of destroyed, I guess. So I think with any of the stories, one of the issues that I had when I wrote the book was that I could have written 3 or 4 books just on all the abuse and everything else, and but that kind of gets boring, doesn't it? Because once you've kind of explained a few things, you start rolling into a great deal of similarity, etc. And so I think for the purpose of balance as well, it's important to point out that there are good people out there, and there were good people out there for me. Not enough of them, but in the beginning there were good people there. And so I think it's important. I think it's an important part of the story. You know, there's a lot of unhappiness, but there were fleeting moments of happiness in there, you know, and there were occasional good people, you know, and I think it's important that those aspects of a story come through, because, you know, I saw a quote recently actually, and it just said, you know, it only takes one good adult to change a child's life. And that is really what, in essence, I kind of sat and thought about that for a while and thought that is really like a really good kind of catch line for my story in a way, you know, because although there were many, many negative things there, the one or two good people I came across, I've had enduring relationships with.
Okay.
You know, I'm like 59 years old now, and we're still in touch. You know, one of the ladies is the godmother to my son. You know, another lady, we have spent many happy times together. We've been to each other's family functions and all of this kind of stuff, you know. So it is a truism, you know, you can, even in the depths of both despair and depravity, if a good person stands up and makes a statement and does something good, you know, you tend to remember it. You know, it's quite easy to remember those people when all the rest of them are bad, you know, so it is quite important. You know?
Okay, well, I mean, that's really significant, and really powerful. As I say, I selfishly don't want you to give too many spoilers away, because I don't want my bedtime reading ruined. But the book, let me show those of you who are viewing. I have a copy of Dave's book here. God, it doesn't show very well. But anyway, it's available on Amazon, so please do purchase it. What I'd like you to do, David, just give us an as I said, I keep telling you, not too many spoilers, but give us a kind of an overview of how you shape the book. What can people expect in terms of the shape of the story, how you tell the story?
Well, the story really is about the 16 years or so that I spent in care, and it's based in the 60s and the 70s. I think I left care around, I think it was about 1980, maybe sort of midway through 1980, something like that. And back in those times, in the 60s and 70s, you know, there was a very different attitude in society to children generally. You know, we were still in a society that effectively beat children at school, for instance, you know.
Victorian,
We're still in a society that saw no problem with elder members of society hitting a child for wrongdoing or whatever. And a child in those times was fairly undervalued. And then there was another subsection of society or infant society, which was valued even less, and that was children in care. And it's still the same today. I still hear many stories today, which are not new stories. It's quite depressing that these stories are still being told by 16, 17, 18-year-olds today. And they're pretty much exactly the same as the stories that were happening in the 60s and 70s. Not as much as abuse, you know, during that time, it's in a very abusive environment. It was a very violent environment. It was an environment in which, as a child, you had to grow up very, very quickly. You know, I often say to people, I don't actually consider that I had a childhood, because I don't believe I've ever experienced that carefree kind of nonchalant stride through life in the knowledge that someone else is just taking care of everything for you, and you can just sit back and enjoy
worry free and and
just do the things that kids do, and whatever happens, you know. Christmas happens, holiday happen, you don't have to worry about it. I've never really experienced that, and so I don't really consider myself as having a childhood. I think I've had an extended adulthood in many ways, or perhaps an extended adolescence, and that naturally just flowed into adulthood. And so, yeah, so these were very very abusive times in that environment. There were very violent times in that environment as well, and very destructive, very destructive times for some children. Some children didn't survive those times.
Mm, mm,
I don't consider myself lucky that I did survive them. I think it was more about, I don't know, do you just kind of, if you can't beat them, join them kind of thing until you can walk away? I think Maya Angelou once said, do your best until you know better. And when you know
yep.
better, do better.
Do better.
And
Yep.
I think that kind of typified what people would call my childhood. You kind of did what you needed to do to survive. But I was one of those kids who always kept quite a keen eye on the right and wrong of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I could look after myself, but I knew that really I shouldn't have had to be doing. And so I kind of grew up like that. I kind of grew up as the only black child in many of these homes. In fact, just about all of them almost until my late teens. So I was a target, not just by the children, but by the staff as well. And I was quite a small guy then. I was quite undernourished. I don't really believe that I really started growing till I actually left care. And then within 6 months, I found that my clothes didn't fit me, and I had a huge problem because I didn't have money to buy any more. And so I learned to use my head a lot as a child. I could, at sort of 6 and 7 years old, I could talk a teenager into suicide if I wanted to, because
no, Dave, no, but yeah,
it's not what you wanted to do, but if it was
Mm-hmm.
necessary, it was there. That's the kind of kid I was kind of growing up as. I learned to use my head. I learned to talk my way out of and around situations as opposed to fight my way through them.
Necessity, yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of served me well, really. I didn't really appreciate it at the time, but it served me well in so much as I never went on to make many of the mistakes that many kids in care made. So I never really got involved in like the criminality that a lot of kids ended up succumbing to. I never got involved in gangs because there weren't any other black kids around at the time. They were all white kids there, their little white gang over there. And I had my gang of one. And so I never really got involved in that. I found myself excluded from a lot of things because of that. But in hindsight, it turned out to be quite beneficial that I was excluded. I wasn't one of the kids who got taken down the street shoplifting or anything like that because nobody wanted to be with a black kid, So it's not that I was particularly any better than any of the others at that time. I guess if I'd have been asked to go down there, I'd have probably fallen into the gang just like everyone else did. But because of the circumstances, I kind of navigated my way around all of that stuff.
Yeah.
It never really kind of knocked on my door, which, like I say, in hindsight, it's turned out to be a very good thing. And it left me with a great deal of, I guess the word is that they use today is kind of resilience. I don't really like using it myself because it's a word that kind of puts all the onus upon the child. You say, well, the child isn't really very resilient. Well,
yeah.
That's because they're a child. They're not supposed to be. It's your job as an adult to be resilient, and you're supposed to look after them.
That's right.
But I guess at the end of the day, that's what it did give me. It gave me that a completely different perspective on life that your average teenager or your average 16, 17-year-old heading out into the world wouldn't have had. And so I guess you call it the street wiles and all the rest of it, and yeah, I could do all that. I could navigate my way around whatever side of life I needed to do. And so it served me well. It's not the way that you should have to learn, but having gone that way, some of those experiences served me well, and it gave me a very good insight into people. It's like I can spot a liar a mile away. It's like, don't even bother approaching me if you've got a lie in your head, because I'll spot it before it's even come out of your mouth, and that's because of the way I grew up. I've seen all sorts of deceit and deception and everything else. And like I say, I'll see it before it's even left your lips. So,
Wow.
no, it's like, don't even bother going there. And again, that kind of serves you well in life. You learn a lot about people's motivations. You learn a lot about people's deceptiveness and their deceit and all of those things. And unfortunately, many of those lessons were learned, looking at social workers, unfortunately. People who would literally sit in front of you in a children's home and lie to your face and not even know that you knew they were lying.
Yeah.
And I've said to many social workers that I've talked to over the years, in some of the presentations and seminars that I've done, don't even go there with a child, because, that child in care has probably seen a lot more of the world at that age than you ever did, without denigrating social workers, because that's not what we're here to do. Social workers, you can kind of stereotype a kind of upbringing in many instances. I've talked to social workers who will sit there open-mouthed and wide-eyed at the stories that I tell them, because they've never even remotely come
outside of their life experience.
Completely outside of it. And so when you walk into a room with a lie in your head, you need to really understand what is sitting opposite you, because that kid knows. And I knew there were social workers that I would never talk to. We would literally spend an hour and a half in a room with them asking questions and me just raising my eyebrows and nodding my head. And I don't talk to liars. I'm not interested in that. I never was. No, and children know, they know.
You
deceive them once and they know you're marked. Once you've deceived them once and they find out, it's very, very difficult to go back on that, because it's no different than we treat people as adults. If somebody lies to you, then they're gone, aren't they?
Yeah.
Why expect anything different from a kid? So,
well, let me pause you for a minute there, Dave. I like to say that every so often, just to sort of backtrack a bit. In terms of you sharing what you're sharing, firstly, what has been the response to some of the things that you're saying to social workers? Are you sort of, what are you hoping lands with them, and what, in your experience, has landed?
I think it's important that they understand, and I think they do understand when you explain it to them, the history behind social work. It gives them a greater understanding, perhaps, of some of the legislation that is around today. It in a way, you perhaps suffer in your jobs because of what your predecessors did, because of what your predecessors got away with. And legislation came along the road and changed the footprint. I think it's important, and I think it's an invaluable tool, particularly at the undergraduate level that many of the people I speak to are engaged in, to understand that there was a very different society to the one that they are now engaged in. That many of the people who I will speak to, have grown up in a society where it's really been frowned upon to beat a child. And they don't have any comprehension of a society where beating children was the norm. It was considered like you were a failure if you didn't. You're a bad parent for not doing that and bringing your child up in a obedient fashion and all the rest of it. And we've all got stories. If you're from a certain era, we've all seen it. It's like
we've all
tried
experienced it.
Yeah, we've all run away from your mate's mum and all the rest of it, because you knew what was coming because of what you've been up to. And so it's often a huge eye opener. It's often a huge eye opener in the context of them realizing that is the people they're now emulating. These were social workers. These weren't bad people, bad men and women on the streets going in and like taking a child or anything like that. These were people who were charged with looking after children. And this is what they got up to. And they're even more surprised when you kind of tell them that, and these were women who were doing this as well.
Yeah.
You know, these were women who were facilitating the sexual abuse of girls in children's homes. You know, we have this thing in society, don't we, where, you know, we just so readily kind of accept that, you know, it's the woman who has all the maternal instinct, who does all the caring, who does all this, and it's like, whoa, you know, where's all that come from? Because I didn't see any of that for the first 16 years of my life. I saw this women and this maternal instinct business. You know, women in my life as a child, you know, alongside the men, were facilitators. You know, they were complicit. You know, they knew that girls were being sexually abused upstairs while they were downstairs having their coffees.
Wow.
You know, these are people who were being paid to look after young girls and young boys. These were women who were having affairs, sexual liaisons with young boys in their care. You know, so you kind of, that whole thing about maternal instincts and everything, you turn it on its head with these stories. So it's not just men, you know, and one of the things I say to people is, you know, get all these stereotyped ideas out of your head about what you might come across.
Yes.
Because when this hits you, it'll hit you hard, and it'll hit you from a direction you never knew. You know, so you've got to be vigilant, you know, and as I said earlier on, it's extremely depressing when you hear so many similar stories. You know, so many times I've sat with care experienced people, young people, you know, people who are 40 years younger than I am, and they're telling me more or less the same sorts of stories about things that are going on and things that they know have gone on and things that they've experienced, you know, and it's all quite depressing, really. And so we need to educate people. We need to educate them in what's gone on, because that informs them about the kind of things they need to be vigilant of.
And the point you make, because we often complain in social work about the levels of bureaucracy that we have to engage in, and so on and so on. But you and I had a chat the other day, and it relates to the point you were making earlier about they are these systems in place now because of what had happened in the past, and to some extent still goes on now. But what's your perspective on that?
Well, there isn't a greater truism, you know. I have conversations all the time with people and on many different subjects, you know, and it's like I say to people, do you know something? If you don't like the race card, stop being racist. If you don't like the sexist card, if you don't like women complaining about sexism, stop being sexist.
Yeah.
That's it. It's that simple. You know, don't abuse children, and then they're not going to come back and abuse you, or they're not going to abuse their children. You know, break the chain. You know, we hear it all the time, you know, break the chain, and that's what it's all about. You know, I have men at work who, you know, I listen to the conversations sometimes, you know, and I'll jump in and I'll say, well, you know, it's not really an appropriate way of speaking or whatever. Oh, you know, and it's, oh, well, what's up with you? And I say, well, there's nothing up with me, clearly, because clearly it's something that's up with you, because you think it's appropriate to talk about women in that way in the workplace. And what's more, you've insulted me by talking about them in front of me like that, with the assumption that I will go along with it.
I'm going to do the same. Yeah.
And it's the same with race. You know, call it out. If you hear someone being racist and you're a white person in a group of white people, you're either going to be complicit to the continuation or you say something. It's that simple. And you don't get to sit at 65 years old bouncing your grandchild on your knee, claiming you were a good, decent person if you walked away and said nothing, because you're not. And when you're a social worker and you see it, and you will see it, mark my words, you will see it, you're going to be faced with options. You can put your head above the parapet, or you can keep your head below it and worry about your career and your mortgage and all paying your bills and all the rest of it. Or you can do what's right by the children you're being paid to look after. And it's that simple in my book, you know. I'm not prepared to entertain any kind of arguments that involve not doing your job in respect of those children that you're being looked after. Because when you fail to do your job, you ruin lives, because that's what happened when I was in care to so many kids. People didn't do their jobs and lives got ruined. You know, and these are the same people now who, you know, they'll sit back and they'll pontificate about children in care going into crime, children in care ending up sleeping on benches, children in care who are drug addicts or drink addicts and all the rest of it. And I always say, but what did you do to stop that? If you're a social worker now, what are you doing now to stop that? Because you're out there now. You're the biggest influence on their lives. Yeah, I went into care when I was around about 6 months old or something like that. And I left when I was around about 16 and a half, approaching 17. That's the entire duration of my childhood when I'm most receptive to every input, when I'm making my understanding and developing my understanding and knowledge of the world. That's all in the hands of social workers. So whatever I turn out as, you know, if it's negative, it's on you. Yeah, in the same way that you look at me and judge me or my son and judge me by my son, I judge you by my childhood.
Yeah, they were your, you know, your parents, what they call it?
Well, they like to call them corporate parents now.
That's the one, yeah. Yeah.
I call them employees. You know, because it's not parenting, is it? You know, I mean, it wasn't parenting then and it isn't parenting now. You know, and I know there'll be lots of pushback on that and people fall back on the fact that, yeah, well, we've got this regulation, we've got that regulation or whatever. The thing to remember is regulation does not stop you being a decent person.
Absolutely.
It does not stop you being a positive force in the life of a child. Yeah. Many of the things that a child needs cost nothing. Yeah, you don't have to put your hand in your pocket. Just say something positive. Yeah, what a great picture. That's great, that, mate. Yeah. What was that book about you read? Yeah, there's so many different things that you can just show that you've got an interest, that you care, that puts you in a positive light and will get a positive response. And if you don't do those things, then you're not doing your job.
Yeah, I hear you. One of the things I wanted to go back to, Dave, was when you were talking about, you know, your ability to sort of spot lies and liars and so on. In your reflections, what does trust mean to you? How did that impact, you know, your sense of trust in adults or people around you, social workers and so on? What thoughts do you have on that?
Well, I think that the big thing for me is what the lack of trust does is it stunts your relationships. And so you end up as a 16, 17-year-old going out into the world with an inability to trust anybody. Because everybody in authority has abused that trust. So it's like, you know, if we all just go back to that point in our lives, 17 years old, stood on the doorstep, you know, imagine having only negative experiences of trust at that point. Every single person that you meet has been part of a system that has been abusive in one way or another. Police were abusive in the homes, clergy were abusive in the homes, teachers were abusive, the staff were abusive, the cleaners were abusive, everybody. Every person that I met in my life as a child was abusive in one way or another. And I include in that the people who said nothing because you facilitated, you were complicit to what went on. You don't get a free pass because you never did it, because you allowed them to do it. Yeah, when you turn your back on it and you say nothing, you facilitate, you're just as bad as they are in my book. And so the big thing for me was starting life really from ground zero at 17, not really knowing how to, being told by society that you're now an adult and that you get on with it, but having no real experience of a trusting relationship.
Yeah.
Having no real experience of anyone ever really saying anything good to you, no real experiences of trust, no experiences of anyone actually saying, I love you just for being you, kind of thing. I mean,
Mhm.
my wife was probably the first person I heard who actually said, I love you,
Mm.
and I got married at, I think I was somewhere in my 20s or whatever, nearly 30,
Mhm.
and that was the first time I really heard those words come out of somebody's mouth who meant it, and
Mhm.
so you're developing all of those relationships, all of those socializations that you've been deprived of, you now have to try and apply
As an adult.
as an adult at 17 years old, going into the big wide world all on your own. And it's important to remember that back in those days, in 1980, when I kind of left the system, you literally did, you were on your own. There was
Mhm.
none of this kind of, oh, well, you have a nice little officer who you can contact.
Leaving Care Act, personal advisor.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, none
personal
of that.
advisor, what's all that about?
Yeah.
I mean, we were literally, there's 12, 15 quid or whatever. We've got your dodgy bed sitting in a dodgy part of town. That's you, mate. Off you go. And nobody cared. Nobody cared. You literally had to work it out yourself.
You're off the books.
You're gone. That was it.
Mm.
There's nobody. You didn't get to go back and say, oh, I've got a bit of a problem, like, this has happened or that's happened, or, have you got
Mhm.
any advice? It was like, who are you? You left 2 months ago. Off you go, mate. Get out. You were gone. You had to learn how to wash your own clothes. No one had ever taught us how to wash clothes. Didn't know how to work a washing machine. Didn't know how to cook a meal. Never been taught anything about budgeting money. Never been taught anything about your relationships with the opposite sex. What's acceptable, what isn't acceptable.
Mhm.
How do you
Mhm.
behave? What's right, what's wrong? Never been told how to, what were the social rules around people in work? What's the deference that you're supposed to give to the manager as opposed to your peer on the shop floor?
Mhm.
What are the differences in all these relationships? And again, you're going into a workplace at 17 and you've got somebody sort of marching down the piece there with his big manager's badge on, thinking, I'll tell this
I'm
kid
behind.
this, that, and the other.
Mhm.
And you're looking at him thinking, well, here's another abuser on the way.
Mhm.
He must be an abuser because he's got a position of power. I've never known anything else. Why would I treat him any differently than any of the other abusers?
Mhm.
And there's nobody there to say, well, actually, Dave, you're not really allowed to smack him on the nose because he's told you what to do. Why not? That's what's gone on for the last 16 years. Whenever you don't like something, you've hit me. And whenever I've not liked anything, I've retaliated in the way that you've taught me by throwing my fists and feet around.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
now at 17, you're saying I can't do that? What's that about? Tell me. So these are the kind of problems that you have. You're in the street and a police officer wants to ask you something. He has no idea, you're 17, 18 years old. He has no idea that every policeman you've ever met is
Mhm.
abusive. And he's probably approaching his job thinking, I'm a decent enough guy, I just need to go and speak to this kid, find out what he's doing or whatever. And next minute you're rolling around on the floor.
Mhm.
And he's thinking, what's going on? And I'm thinking, yeah, what is going on, mate? Because I know what your mates were up to when you were in the children's homes.
Mhm.
What is going on? And so you've got all this to work out and literally nobody on the face of the earth to bounce this off. So some of the stuff that has changed, I know I kind of a little bit mocking about the personal advisors and things, but, some of those changes are good,
Yeah.
to have somebody to be able to turn around and say, right, this happened today and I don't understand it. This bloke at work said X, Y, and Z. I don't understand why he thinks he can say that. Well, it's because he's a supervisor and he's got responsibility for all those people in your squad. And he's responsible for your safety. He's responsible for this, responsible for that. There was no one there to tell me that. I'm just looking at a guy who thinks he can abuse me. And there's only one solution to that problem, in my eyes, at that age.
Retaliate.
That's roll around the floor with him and see who wins, you know. And so trust, relationships, all these things, you know, when you talk about corporate parents, just take the corporate off that. Okay, now we're talking about parents. If you would train your own children in those skills, why are you not training the children in care in those skills? Yeah. If you wouldn't say something about your own children, or you'd be offended that someone else did, why are you saying or writing that about a child in care? Because you're a parent now, you're not a corporate parent, different perspective. And this is part of the problem. If you put that corporate word in, it facilitates all of these abuses in one way or another. Because somehow that child is not really a child. It's not, you know, it's almost like with the word corporate, the child is owned by an entity. As opposed to needing a parent. You know, we're not commodities.
That's right.
Children in care are not commodities. You know, we're not there to just ensure that you earn a good living and you just walk away without any responsibility. And you have no right to expect us to be balanced adults if you've contributed nothing to that. You know, because these are the formative years. The younger they are, the bigger that impact is. The formative years, understanding the rules of society, the way things work. Why are we expected to be deferent to older people? Why is it nice to get up and offer your seat on a bus to an older person? Why is it appropriate that you show a little bit of respect to the manager or the supervisor or the policeman in the street, or indeed the social worker who may actually have your best interests at heart, even though you may not know it?
One of the things you said, Dave, in the event that I attended was something along the lines, and I mean, you're saying it to an extent now, is the sort of centrality of relationships. And you made some comments about some of the struggles you've had because of that absence of significant relationships in your sort of formative years. Do you want to say any more about that? Or
well, I think the issue that arises is when you've not had any of those formal socializations that you would normally expect. If we were to turn around and say, the average person who's got kids, they kind of see them through university, so they're around about the age of 21 when they're really stepping out into the world and making a difference for themselves. It's 21 years of being taught how society works, the socialization into society, the rules of engagement. Now, here's a problem. If you put a child out into society who's never had that, whilst simultaneously holding the expectation that they understand it, you've got a problem. And that's the problem that I had. People were coming to my table, expecting me to know all these things when I had had no formal education in them. Know that whole process that we do with our own children, that whole kind of thing, even just going back to, the first couple of times that a child throws a hand out to hit somebody else, and that whole process of, no, that's naughty. You don't do that. You don't hit people. That's not right. That whole thing, just about every form of socialization was missing. It was always the wrong socialization being taught. And so the expectation that people have of a person who's experienced care, particularly somebody like me who spent their entire childhood in care, is completely wrong, and they need to devolve themselves as that. You know, you need to set a different set of expectations, a different set of values. And that's not to say that your values are incorrect. What I'm saying is you need to take a step back from them and try to form some sort of objective measure about where that child is in that process.
Mhm.
You know, because
Give
I
me an
had
example. Give me an example,
survival
because
and-
that's quite a complex thing to sort of understand. Perhaps
well,
you
I
know,
just think
expand. Yeah, give me an example.
well, again, going back to this kind of fighting thing, you know, I spent my childhood just fighting everybody. You know, sometimes I did it for fun, sometimes I did it out of necessity. And it was only when I was like 16, 17 and out there in the world that I really started to understand, you know, something, and as smart as you are, you need to stop this because actually there's consequences now.
Mm.
No one had ever really got me. It was deemed to be part of your upbringing that you could look after yourself. And there was never anything that said, when this happens and they throw a punch, sometimes it's better to walk away. I fought every day sometimes. I didn't care if I won or lost. It was about being in the fight. You know, and I think I mentioned that in the book at some point where one of the older kids in one of the homes said that to me. It's not about winning. It's about letting them know that you're prepared to stand up and do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what gets them to back down. That's what gets them to think twice about whether they're going to throw a punch at Dave Jackson. They're only going to think about, is he likely to throw it back?
Mm-hmm.
And if he does, what are my chances of winning?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I was up for it every single day. I used to wake up, I used to go to bed doing it, you know, and there were times when, yeah, you know, I mean, I kind of thought it was great, you know, because you had your losses and then you had your wins and it was great. And nobody ever said, yeah, okay, you know, you can look after yourself, but you really don't need to be like that because the world isn't like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is just you're only seeing a very small fraction of what the world is
Mm-hmm.
in a very closely monitored and regulated environment. I thought that was what the world was like. That's why I was fighting with policemen on the streets of Bolton at 17 and 18.
Mm-hmm.
And they're thinking this kid's crazy. And I'm thinking these guys are crazy. Everybody's thinking everybody's crazy.
Yeah.
And nobody's asking the questions. You know, these are days when, you know, it was just deemed to be the norm. Nobody ever stopped and said, no, that's actually wrong. And I had to work that out for myself
Mm-hmm.
before I got into any serious trouble. You know, and it's a huge, huge failing. And then there's other kids who, you know, they were coming back to children's homes drunk and there were no consequences. And there were no consequences because in some of those homes, staff members were sending us with their money to the off license to buy the booze for them. I used to go buying booze for social workers to take it back.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that booze was shared. I used to be sent with money in my hand, in my pocket, to put the bets on at bookmakers for social workers who were running homes.
Mm-hmm.
So what lessons are you teaching? You know, what lessons are you teaching? And then society has a problem with a 14-year-old mixing it up with alcohol. Actually, it is your problem as a society because you've never taught that it was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and there's just so many different examples of, you know, just criminal malpractice, really.
Yeah,
You know,
that's what it amounts to. Yeah.
and you probably wouldn't get away with it today, but back in that day, you did. Saturday mornings in one of the homes, you know, it was absolutely nothing unusual about seeing a member of staff writing the bets out on a slip, giving you money and sending you down to the bookies to put it on. Saturday nights, there's money, down to the off license, this is what I want, all written down on a piece of paper. You know, in you go, get it, out you come. you know, and they're drunk. These are social workers who are drunk in a children's home.
Yeah.
You know, and you're going around
Your
scooping up the
parents, yeah.
half pints of lager and everything that they've left when they've fallen over. You know, they're not
Mhm.
waking up till Sunday morning. You know, and half of the kids now, because they're looking at him on the floor, they're out in the town. You know, 2, 3, 4 in the morning. They're out in the town because the social worker is unconscious,
Mhm.
kitchen. And you kind of think to yourself, and then society has a problem with me because I reflect the behaviors that I was taught.
Mhm.
Well, if you'd have taught some good
Behaviors you've
ones, I'd have
seen, yeah.
reflected them, wouldn't I? You know, and then you've got that whole
God.
thing rolled into there, you know, which back in the 70s and the 80s, you know, you got that whole thing there about it's just another compounding factor on how society viewed Black youth anyway.
Well, let's segue into that experience, because you did sort of hint at it earlier. But as a Black boy, young man, I mean, what are your reflections on that whole experience? When you were talking earlier about being excluded, which, you know, on reflection is probably a good thing, but at the time that must have been awful.
Well, it was awful, but in a way, it was somewhat beneficial because it allowed me to kind of forge my own path, even though
Yeah.
some of my initial paths may have been slightly unwise. At least they
Mhm.
were my own choices.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I was never, you know, don't get me wrong, I was never like any arch criminal or anything like that. You know,
Mhm.
for the vast majority of my time, I had a reasonably healthy respect for the law. I
Yeah.
just felt sometimes when I was confronted or cornered, then I reverted back to, now you're
Survival.
cornered,
Mm.
there's only one way out, and that's going
Mhm.
forward, and he's in the way.
Mhm.
So that's what happened. But it was nothing, I was never a shoplifter, I was never a burglar, I was never out
Mhm.
stealing cars or bikes or anything like that. You know, I just had a different way of approaching problems, you know, and that was purely grounded in my childhood. And I think because in society, it was also the case that people had this very disparaging, very negative view of young Black males in particular, that kind of exacerbated a lot of things. I think many things were escalated to levels that they would never have been escalated had I been white.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying like it's a big racist plot or anything. I'm just stating it as a fact.
Mhm.
Some of the
Mhm.
situations I found myself in and that I can recall now, I just think, yeah, it probably wouldn't have happened if you were white because the initial approach would have been different.
Yeah.
And quite often with me, it was that initial approach that set the tone for the rest of the engagement,
Mhm.
you know, and that could either just be something like a tone of voice, a look in an eye, an expression across the face. And that told me something. It probably told me then, as somebody who was quite hypersensitive to abusive people,
Mhm.
it told me something that it perhaps wouldn't have told somebody else.
Mhm.
And then that shaped the direction of the entire meeting going forward, so to speak. So I found growing up, I found race was an issue. It was perhaps less of an issue if I'd have gone into care or wider society at kind of 10 years old. I think because I grew up with that, I learned to handle it in a very different way.
Mhm.
I think if I'd have been perhaps a Black kid from a Black family going into the care system at 10 or 11 or 12, it may have been a much more disturbing experience.
Mhm.
I kind of grew up with it. And, you know, as I've said before, you know, I had a big list of people who I could confidently smack in the mouth for saying it, and a big list of people who, well, I just have to let it slide because, you know, if you go on at him, it's going to kick the living crap out of you. So, you know, it's like, that's how it is, isn't it? You know, you grow up, you learn, and, you know, one day you
Yeah.
might be a
You
big
pick your
boy and you can
battles.
go and sort him out then, you know. So just remember everything, you know. I think I was
God.
one of those kids, you know, I was like always, because I grew up as a bit of a thinker, I had a very good memory, you know, so I did get my revenge on one or two people when I sort of found out, hey, you know something, I'm actually a little bit bigger than him now, you know. So remember when you said this to me, mate? Yeah.
Wow.
And now it's on, you know. And so we're rocking around in the shoe room or whatever, you know. So, well, it's all part of the game, isn't it? You know, and we all know, I mean, kids fighting, you know, it probably seems a lot worse as a kid than it actually is when an adult's looking at what's going on. You know, it's like the world at the time, it's just a big, massive ruck and everybody's involved. And, you know, to the adults watching, it's just like, oh, you know, here we go again kind of thing, you know.
Madness.
Yeah. It was a mad time, you know, it was because you were just, it's, I mean, the only way I can kind of describe it, I don't know if you've ever seen that film Midnight Express, and it's the American lad who goes over to Turkey and he gets caught with the drugs and ends up in a Turkish prison.
Oh gosh, oh god, yeah. Oh dear.
And he really
I
has
remember
to
that
just
one.
suddenly adapt to this entirely new culture, this entirely new way of doing stuff in a way that he's never ever considered ever in his life. He never even knew that kind of life was possible. And now he's right in amongst it all, and he's got to somehow find a way to survive all this. And that's what it was, you know. It was just like the game, you know. It was just a game. You just had to find a way, you know. And sometimes that involved creating alliances with people, you know. And some of those alliances held up, some didn't, you know. And I just found, like I say, as the only black kid in a lot of these places, it served me well in some respects, despite the detriments, because you know, it did teach me to think. It did teach me a lot about group dynamics. It taught me a lot about developing relationships in a way, because although they were out of necessity, you know, the ability to kind of sit down now and again and create a little alliance with somebody who was a lot bigger than you and could offer an element of protection, you know, was a good thing. And yeah, you know, you learn to talk your way around situations as opposed to getting embroiled in them, you know. So
Wow.
yeah, it's a strange one. It's not like what you want for your own kids, but you know.
Yeah, but not necessarily in that way. And that for me is very much about surviving and being tenacious and bobbing and weaving and just trying to get through.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, Dave, what about, you know, you're now a father. What did that present in terms of challenges for you?
Well,
So you're now a father. You've been a father for 20 odd years, haven't you?
30 now, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, really? You're a
30
big
this
man,
year,
man.
my boy. Yeah, he's a good kid.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, it did at the outset, and it wasn't in a very negative way in terms of him. In fact, I think it's fair to say that he benefited from my experiences, because I always had this thing in my head of, I'm never going to do to him what happened to me. I'm never going to create that level of unhappiness. I'm never going to be responsible for this. I'm going to make sure he has everything on. If it goes wrong, it'll be because I give him too much and I did too much for him and I was too nice and this, that, and the other. I thought, if it goes wrong, that's what it's going to be going wrong for. But where it did create a real significant problem for a while was because I have this kind of great memory for things that have happened. I would look at him at certain ages and it used to bring back memories of what was happening at that time.
Okay.
And I think that was probably one of the times that really I started to understand how wrong many of those things were. Because now I, you know, it's like he was literally just walking, or, you know, he's probably maybe one or something like that. And I was just looking at him one day and I just started getting all these flashbacks about things that I could remember. And people say, like, you can't remember things when you were one. I say, no, I can. I can. Yeah, I'll tell you what was happening. I know, you know, and that kind of kept presenting itself throughout his development. You know, I mean, there was a thing in the book there. I won't spoil it too much for you, but I ran away from home once, and I actually went to France. I actually got to France. Yeah.
But how old were you?
I think I was about 12 or something like that. No, I got from Bolton all the way to France, and I had a couple of days wandering around Calais. And then the gendarmes found me
Oh,
sleeping in the
jeez.
actual. It used to be a hoverport at the time. They used to have the hovercrafts
Mhm.
from Dover.
Yes, I
Um,
remember it well. You and
yeah,
I are about the
well,
same age, so yeah.
yeah. Well, I got myself down there. I got myself down to London on the train, which wasn't too difficult because back in that day, you know, nobody really troubled the kid for a ticket. You know, you just
Yeah,
sat
yeah,
there
yeah.
and they just assumed your parents were somewhere on the train or whatever. And
Mhm.
so I ended up at London, and then I think I must have seen something on a board somewhere, whatever, and it was like Dover, and I kind of thought, oh, that sounds quite a nice place, like, you know. And I think I'd heard of Dover sole at the fish and chip shop or
Oh
whatever. You know,
my
so
God.
I kind of thought, for some reason, something kind of clicked, and I ended up in Dover. And
Oh dear
I was
me.
wandering around the hoverport in the area, like the reception area, so to speak. And I always remember it. There was like a school trip going out. There's all these kids there. And then I just followed them onto the hovercraft, you know, because it just seemed like a bit of a crack, to be honest. You know, it's like they're all going on holiday and I'll just take them.
Oh my
And,
goodness, sorry.
and so I ended up in the hoverport on the other side of the channel. And I kind of wandered around a little bit and had a bit of a crack, so to speak. And I kind of slept in there because I went back the first night, basically just looking for somewhere to sleep, you know, like a bin or whatever, some corner. And there was one of the office windows was open, so I kind of climbed in and just slept under a desk basically, and climbed out the next morning. And I think I'd done that for maybe 2 or 3 nights, and I think somebody had kind of maybe reported, well, I think somebody's been in here.
Mhm.
So the sort of the final morning, the morning of my capture, so to speak, I kind of started to come out of the window, and there was all these gendarmes waiting for me. So,
God.
so
Oh my word.
we tried to do a bit of negotiation, but my English and their French, like, it didn't really work out at all. It was a bit of a non-starter. So I kind of came back, and then they pulled a kind of Sweeney type operation on me as I came walking through the reception area at Dover as I got off the hovercraft, and I ended up in a children's home down in Kent for a while.
Wow.
Which actually was quite a nice place. I really did want to stay down there, to be honest. It
Mhm.
was a really nice children's home, actually. I was there for
Mhm.
about a week while they arranged for some social worker to drive all the way from Bolton to pick me up, you know. So yeah.
Wow.
So
But in terms of your own son, is the comparison thing or the flashbacks you're thinking that should never really have happened? That might,
absolutely,
is that what
yeah.
you're saying? Or yeah.
Yeah. And I looked at him at that age, and I mean, the thing that kind of struck me in the first instance was how horrific it would be if I got a telephone call saying,
Yeah.
"Just got your son is in Calais,
Yeah.
and the gendarmes have got him." And then the second thing that kind of struck my mind is I kind of thought to myself, which was kind of a bonus. I kind of thought to myself, yeah, but he actually is not capable of that.
Yeah.
And that kind of made me smile, because then I kind of
Yeah.
thought,
He's having a childhood.
you've
Yeah.
done your job. Yeah. Because he wouldn't have a clue how to do any of that.
Mhm.
So I kind of
Mhm.
thought that's a good thing. And then, yeah, the realization kind of kicked in about what would have to happen in his life
Mhm. Mhm.
now to get him to think that was appropriate thing to do
Mhm.
at his age. And then you kind of start to understand the gravity of some of the things that you
Your
have seen and
relationship.
some of the things that you've had to witness and that you've had to do in order to survive, to realize that at that age, you sat in a bedroom in a house in Bolton and came up with a plan, and you walked away from everything.
And you
Everything you
executed it.
knew, everybody you knew, any place that you'd ever been, you got on a train. I had some fruit in a bag, which I'd picked up from the outdoor market. Just went down there on the way to the train station. There's all this fruit because they'd had the market stalls that day or whatever, and there's just all abandoned fruit on the floor and that. And I had a bag full of that sort of stuff and some water and bits and pieces, tins of pop. And yeah, you know, I kind of had a bit of a moment where I kind of thought, wow, you know, how bad were things that you thought better off doing that than staying where you were? You know, and there were times during those years when, you know, I spent many nights just sleeping rough as a kid, and all the dangers that that actually brings to you. You know, it was safer to sleep on the streets than it was to sleep in the homes that they were putting you in.
Right.
You know, I know girls who habitually ran away from home, girls who were forced to spend day after day, week after week in pajamas because they were habitual absconders. Nobody questioned why they were absconding because nobody wanted to be given the answer. You know, but the first chance they got, they were gone. You know, these are like 10, 11, 12-year-old girls who feel safer on the streets than they do in the homes where they are definitely going to be abused. You may as well take your chance on the street. You might get a peaceful night. You know, and this is the kind of thing. So, yeah, when you get your own kids and then you start kind of looking at them at certain ages and, you know, reflecting back on things that you were doing at that age. And I mean, I'd have been horrified if like the police had brought my son home at any age and said, he'd just been in a ruck with a constable in the town centre. And yet I felt nothing about that, you know. And that's not because I was a bad kid. It's because no one had ever taught me anything different. The solution to every problem lay in your fists and your feet. That's what they taught us, you know. And then society's like, oh, look at him, he's a madman. He's fighting with the police down centre every Saturday afternoon. No, I'm not a madman. I'm just doing what you taught me. He said something offensive. He's taught me over there that if someone says something offensive, you hit them and you get it on. You know, and then, but society is now looking at it through these alternate spectacles that they always seem to have.
Rose-colored glasses, or
The
what you want
ones
to
that
call it.
only
Yeah,
see the things they want to see, and you know,
absolutely.
hearing aids that only hear the things they want to hear.
Yeah,
But there's more to it. You know, nobody was asking, hold on, take a look at that 12-year-old's behavior. What is that about? How has he come across those behaviors? What's happening in his life that he thinks the solution to everything is a fight? Where does he live? Who's bringing him up? What's happening? Nobody's asking those questions.
Yeah, and that's where you find your answers.
Exactly. But it was easy then, you know. Child in care, easily disparaged. Black child in care, even easier to disparage.
Yeah,
It's all his fault. It's amazing how much fault they can put on a 12-year-old, you know, without ever questioning the adults who are looking after them.
Absolutely.
You know? And that's what it was, you know, and it's the whole caboodle, you know, is it was wrong, you know. And again, it goes back to that relationships thing, and it goes back to understanding. You know, I consider myself quite lucky in that I was always reasonably intelligent. I'd say I was probably above average intelligence for my age at most points in my life. And so I was able to look at things and sort of say, well, I understand that I need to do that now, but it is wrong. You get the chance, going back to the Maya Angelou thing, you know, when you know better, do better. You know, I was able to kind of adopt that kind of philosophy. And, you know, I think I was 17, maybe 17 and a half when I sort of was sat in this bedsit that they'd given me. And it just dawned on me. I kind of thought, you know something, you have to move away from Bolton because nothing good is going to happen to you here, because this is where the problem currently is. And so I did. That's what I did. I just packed my job and I just got on a train and went, and I got a job somewhere else. I lived in a B&B for quite a few months, you know. And that was the kind of things that used to go through my head. You know, I was capable of joining all the dots. I was capable of placing all the pieces of the jigsaw. But sometimes it's not about that. Sometimes it's about getting through the moment.
Absolutely.
You know, it's about that moment in time, and nothing else counts. Not interested in society's rules, not interested in anybody's rules, because it's about this moment right now. It's a little bit like a sort of soldier in combat, isn't it? You know, we know all the rights and wrongs of everything, but as the bullets start flying, it's about that moment.
You've got to survive that moment. Yeah,
have to forget everything else, because nothing else matters other than surviving that moment. And that's what it is. And so people need to ask more questions. Social workers need to ask more questions. Social workers need to be more critical of their own actions and need to look at themselves far more than they ever need to look at a child. Because if social workers and carers are doing their job, the child will do their job, because they will know nothing else other than to do their job. Children go wrong when they have options that include doing wrong.
Yeah. If that's one of the choices put on the table. So ask questions of self.
If there's no
know
guide,
yourself, and ask questions of the people you're working for or with.
Exactly, you know, and if a child's displaying these behaviors, don't jump on the child, jump on the situation. You know, remove the child and say, what's causing that? Because it's too easy to label the child. That's not doing your job. If you do everything else right, and then it results in labeling the child, okay, we'll go with that for a while. But if you're just labeling the child for convenience, because it's easier just to put a couple of sentences in a report that this child is disruptive, it's unruly, it's in discipline, then you file your report, go home to your own family, you're not a social worker. You're an employee. Yeah, because I can get that from the cleaner. Yeah, we don't need a social worker for that. You can get that from the cleaner. You can get that from a bus driver. Yeah, you can get that from a road sweeper. Social work is a profession. Yeah, you're professional people, so you need to do a professional job. And it's as simple as that. Okay,
on that note, that's a good place to pause. So thank you for those insights and those comments, Dave. Tell us a little bit about where our listeners can get the book. What was it like writing the book? Did it take a lot out of you, or was it a release? And who do you hope will read the book?
Well, the book is called...
It's a lot of questions, I know, but I'm sure you'll answer all of them.
It's all right. I'll work it out. We'll get round to it. The book is called Oi, which is OI, and it's available on Amazon. I think if you just go on the homepage and type it in the search bar.
Yes, it was very easy to get, actually.
Yeah, I think it just comes up. I think it's got my name on the front, so it's easy.
Yes.
But yeah, so the idea for writing it was never really about actually writing a book, in all honesty. I kind of just reached a point in my life where I'm one of those people. I think we need to preserve things. We need to preserve history. We need to preserve cultures. We need to preserve languages. You know, we need all these things that have the potential to disappear, need to be preserved in some way, so that potentially in the future people get the benefit of that. You know, nobody would countenance, for instance, reading a book and then burning it. You know, you take the knowledge, pass the book on to someone else, give them the knowledge. And so I started writing rather, more just to preserve the story. You know, I got involved with a few groups, and I started hearing various bits and pieces, and I kind of thought, yeah, you know, you've really got a responsibility to document what you know. That's what it was about at first, and then I kind of passed it to a few people I trusted, and they all kind of came out, oh no, you've got to like just a few minor adaptations and that, and you've got to publish, you've got to get it out in a book, people need to read it and that, you know. And so I did that, and it was quite a rewarding thing in a way, because to sort of have it published was quite rewarding. It was a nice thing, but it opened the door to a lot of other people, which it was something I'd never really thought about. And I started having people contact me on social media, and, you know, it's that old thing, you know, I thought I was the only one, and that happened to me. And, you know, I've never been able to talk about it, but when I read your book, it kind of all come rushing back, and I was able to talk to my wife, I was able to talk to my husband, and I started getting all these messages and started talking to people. And yeah, you know, you then start to dig a little bit deeper, and there's all sorts of investigations going on
Yeah.
about all this stuff that was going, historical abuses in these places. And so, yeah, so the book got published, and I was quite pleased about that. It was a good thing. And yeah, I mean, I just put it out there for people to read. You know, I do these talks occasionally when some of these universities and what have you get in touch, and I'll go down and spend a day, and we'll discuss things and talk. And I think it's just invaluable knowledge. You know, I think it's things like this shouldn't be allowed to just die and be forgotten. You know, I think people,
and trust me, it's so easy for that to happen when people
exactly,
have
when you've
just
got a
one,
disparaged minority of society, a
yeah,
subsection of society, it's easy just to brush it over, and it's
yeah,
easy to blame them. And I think there's a lot of powerful messages in there. You know, there's a lot of powerful messages about, you know, abusers come in all shapes, sizes, colors, and everything else. You know, and you can't look at someone and say they're not the type, because they were all the type back then. Yeah, there were the doers and there were the watchers, both as guilty in my book. There's no brownie points for just being a watcher. You facilitated. You may as well have done it, as far as I'm concerned, because you allowed it to be done. And so, yeah, you know, a lot of people, in fact, I'd probably say other people get more out of it than I do, because it's just a story that's been in my head since it developed. You know, these are actual lived experiences. So in many ways, I was kind of surprised with how much people identified with it. You know, I was surprised at some of the contacts that were made and some of the stories that I went on to hear, and, you know, the friends that I've made through it, you know, people who've shared similar experiences and that, you know. And because I was never one of those who thought I was the only one. I was probably just one of those people who just thought like nobody really gives a shit, you know. It's like it's happened and nobody cares. You know, you just have to deal with it yourself. And that's what I did do. You know, I just got on with life, and I just dealt with it. You know, I was never one of these people in and out of rehabs or prisons or anything like that. I just kind of said, oh, it's happened. You know, you can't turn the clock back, but you can go back and write about it, you know.
absolutely.
And so that's what I did, you know, and it wasn't really any kind of cathartic exercise or anything. It was really just something that I just kind of, like I say, I just developed this ideology that, you know, you don't let languages die, you don't let stories die, you don't let cultures die, you know, you don't want animals to become extinct and all that kind of thing, you know. So that was the whole impetus behind it, really. It was nothing in terms of, oh, I'm going to publish this and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z with it or whatever. It was really just write it down, and then at some point I'll give it to my boy, and then he can give it to the grandkid, and, you know, it just stays alive for a while. You know, at some point it'll probably end up on a floppy disk or a USB stick that gets destroyed and it's gone anyway. But, you know,
David, we don't have floppy disks anymore. What are you talking about, man?
well, I do, but I use them as coasters now for my cups of tea things, you know.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I mean, I think certainly in terms of the profession that I'm involved in, and you know, my role as an educator now, I think there's tremendous value in you know, your accounts and the accounts of others. So I think that is an extremely worthwhile legacy, and I will definitely do my bit to ensure that that the story gets heard. It. Do you think you have another book inside of you, or have you not really
Oh,
given
I've
that much
probably got,
thought?
yeah. I mean, I've got I'm almost through another book at the moment, which is
Oh, wow. Okay.
kind of related to it, really. It's really, yeah, I mean, it's a follow-up in a way. I won't give too much away, but yeah, it's a follow-up in a way. I'm probably about 95% through it at the moment. I'm just kind of
Oh, wow.
really kind of going over it, really, just redrafting a few bits. But yeah, I mean, I could probably do another 2 books on the experiences, but it's kind of slightly repetitious. So I think probably in terms of,
There's something of a coach inside of you, though. From what I'm, even the way we started the conversation, there's something quite coaching and personal development in some of the things that you mentioned earlier on. So that's
yeah,
probably something you can look at as well.
yeah. I mean, it's probably an area that I may kind of get into on a more kind of casual ad hoc basis when I kind of get around to maybe semi-retirement or something from my current works. I think it's something, like I say, you know, I think the value is to people to understand where it's you just have to understand where things have come from, don't you? You know, and in the social work arena, like you
Yes.
say, you know, there's a lot of legislation now. There's a lot of perhaps what people see as pointless legislation. You know, there's perhaps a lot of legislation that they feel detracts from doing the job. But you have to understand where that's come from and why it's come from, and the onus is on the current generation to ensure they don't make the mistakes of the past. So then maybe you can start peeling some of that legislation back a bit, because it's back to
But
that
we're not
old
there.
thing,
We're not
isn't
there
it?
yet.
You know, it's back to that old thing. If you don't like race relations laws being imposed upon you, stop being a racist prick. Yeah. If you don't like sexism laws, stop being sexist. If you've got an issue with the current legislation in social work, do better than the people who were before you. Show that it can be done humanely. Show that you can care, that you can love children in those settings. Show that you can develop, because all these people, they're very good at saying, oh, well, X percentage of people in care, they end up in prison, X percentage end up on drugs, X percent end up on a park bench. They never turn around and say, and that's on us because we're the corporate parents.
Yeah. It's not the whole story.
If all that's happening, what are you doing about it? Because these are kids in your care. You are the corporate parent. Yeah, it's got that word in there again, parent. What are you doing about it? Don't quote the statistics to me because I already know them. You know, I knew them before some of you guys were born. You know, I'm nearly 60 years old. I know all these things before some of you were born. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to be the one to put your head above the parapet and say, whoa, that's wrong? Or are you going to be just like all the rest, pay your mortgage, keep your mouth shut, and let it all perpetuate over time? Because people say they have no power, but they do. Because you have collective power. If you all stand up and say, that's wrong, they have to listen. You know, I've done an exercise once with a group of people, and I said to them, it was basically about this type of thing, the ability to actually stand up and get heard and affect change. And they were all in this auditorium. And I got one lady to stand up. She was on the left-hand side in this auditorium. I said, just stand up. And I said to them, I said, if this lady has a different view to all of you lot in here, she's not going to be heard. And then I got the rest of the line to stand up. I said, these people here all hold the same view as this lady. They're still not going to be heard because you far outweigh them in number. But now you have to kind of just listen a little bit. Then we get half of the auditorium to stand up. Now you're in a discussion. Now, when the other half starts standing up, the balance is tipping. So if you as social workers in your organizations know that things are wrong, stand up together and say they're wrong. Because that's how you're going to get change, because they have to listen. Yeah, but what you're doing now is you're letting the odd person put the head above a parapet and be called a whistleblower and jumped out of the job. Yeah. And then you all sit there and say, oh, well, that's what happens when you stand up. Well, that's what happens when you let someone stand up on their own. Yeah. But if you'd have all stood up, because that colleague who's just been jumped out of the job was your mate 2 weeks ago. You were out drinking on the Christmas socials, you know, but when she stood up, you sat down. That's the problem. Her standing up wasn't the problem. You sitting down when she stood up was the problem. You know, stand up together. You know, there's elements of that legislation which is wholly inappropriate and wrong. Stand up together and say it's wrong. You've got your organisations, you've got BASWA and all these other people. Stand up together and say it's wrong. What are BASWA doing? You know, if you guys are all telling BASWA that it's wrong, and BASWA
has
are
to
not
listen,
speaking to management and saying it's wrong, then change the people who are at the top in BASWA. Yeah, change them because you elect them. Yeah, it's no different than local elections that we've just had. I don't like your policies. Bye bye. My vote's going elsewhere. Get rid of them. You know, because you've got the power. That's the good thing. There's only very limited people at the top. And all the ability to change those people at the top is at the bottom. Yeah. If all you lot walked out of work one day and said, the reason we're walking out is because of that person at the top, someone's going to have a look at the person at the top, aren't they? Someone has to, don't they?
They do indeed.
You know, if all the school teachers walked out and said, it's the headmaster and we ain't coming back till someone's had a look, someone's going to have a look. So it's not rocket science and it isn't difficult. Yeah, if you can bring 11 blokes together and form a football team, why can't you bring 11 social workers together? Why can't you bring 20, 30, 40, 50? You've got BASWA. Yeah, you've got all those nice, fancy, high-paid positions out and about with the nice cars and the credit cards and the expenses and that, apparently doing your bidding. Well, if they're not doing your bidding, take the car, take the credit card, give them a job in the social work department and put someone else there. I don't see what the problem is. But I know what the problem is. And I dare say that you do.
I'm waiting for you to say it, Dave, so we can finish this interview because you're saying some stuff there that needs to be said. So say it. What do you think the problem is?
Well, the problem is that you don't have leadership.
Thank you.
It's as simple as that. I actually, they've just had the care review, haven't they? McAllister,
yes,
a teacher doing a social work care review. Okay, that's fine. We know it's nonsense. Yeah, he wasn't independent because he's got business links to the DFE and all the rest of it. We know that. That's fine. It is what it is. Okay. I got sick and tired of hearing social workers telling me what I already knew. He knows nothing about the job. He shouldn't be doing that. I know that. Why are you telling me? Yeah. The number of times I told BASWA exactly what that report that man was going to produce. And I could have written it the day he was given the job. Yeah. I'm involved with groups. We discussed it. Yeah. I told him I've been in and around that business kind of environment. Part of my job in the nuclear is kind of around the business processes and the planning and everything else.
Yeah.
I've been a counsellor. I've been around politics. I told them before he even started the job what the report was going to say. I told them what they needed to do about that. And 18 months later, he produced the report that I told them he was going to produce. And then they're trying to mobilize. Too late. You're on the back foot by then because he's gone to the DFE. He slapped it on the desk. Gavin Williamson has picked it up, said, thanks, Josh. There's your £140,000. By the way, we might have some more work for you. Here's another £10 million for your frontline organisation and all the rest of it that's going on. Yeah. You've got chief social worker. You've got all these other people. Yeah. You need to do something about it because I can see it. Other people can see it. You can see it. Your social workers can see it, but you're not doing anything about it. Imagine if the social workers had gone out on a one-day national strike in protest at Josh McAllister being given the chairmanship of the care review, and then threatened to do it once a week until he was removed.
Something would have changed.
Something would have changed, exactly. Something would have changed, but you didn't. You sat back because sometimes, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, you kind of be a little bit woolly because we're taught that we have to be nice to people. We're taught that we have to be kind and gentle and hashtag be kind and all this kind of stuff. Sometimes no. Sometimes go for the throat when it's appropriate. If your survival is on it, because I told him what he was going to write, and I told him the next step, which is to make social workers agency workers. Then you've got no power. Because you're going to them every single month for your work. Then they've got you. That's the next step. Yeah, he's put all these ideas in. DFE, thank you very much, Josh. That's exactly what we wanted to hear. I told them what we wanted to hear. We knew what they wanted to hear. It's all going to go down the privatization route. So it's plain as the nose on his face. You don't have to be a genius to work that out. You know, and now the next step is the privatization route that is proposed. That's what's going to happen. And you're going to become agency workers. They're going to de-skill you. They're going to deprofessionalize you. And it'll start when they start attacking your degree courses. Why do you need a degree to be a social worker? You're just looking after kids. That's not a big deal. We all do it. I'm a father. What's different? Yeah, de-skill you. Then they've got you. Then they fan it out to the private sector. You all become agency workers. You have no teeth because as soon as you open your mouth, boom, your contract is not renewed. You've got an element of it now with Ofsted. They've got you all, haven't they? Because you know you put your head above the parapet. Oh, well, we'll just withdraw your license to practice.
All right, Dave.
It's not that the writing's on the wall. It's literally plastered in every newspaper and everything you read.
Yeah, it's already written on the wall. Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. Well, we've obviously got a lot of work to do. Dave, I'm gonna wrap this up because I think what you've just left us with in the final stages of your interview is the challenge.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a challenge.
So it's up to you guys, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your profession is in your hands now, and you're on the back foot because that report, that care review is in. You're on the back foot now. You're 2 years behind where you need to be. But it can still be done if you have the right approach. And the right approach is not being nice people. The right approach is to be nasty people for a short while. Put the bits in.
All right, Dave. I'm not going to edit any of this out. All right. Dave Jackson, thank you so much for sharing some of your stories, some of your insights, some of your personal experiences. It's been an absolute joy listening to you. And, you know, you're not pulling any punches. I don't blame you. This is serious business. You know, to be honest, you know, this is serious business. Can't be messing about. And we're in a climate where things are serious. So I absolutely agree with what you're saying. So thank you so much. I mean, do people follow you or anything? Is there any links you want to give out, or do we have to wait for the next book?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a Twitter account at the moment. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Just let me.
Well, what I will do, I'll get it. I'll put it in the show notes because I have your
Yeah,
I'll get
and you
your
can
contact,
put my email address there. I mean,
Okay.
if people want to kind of make contact and discuss, or they want the link to the book, I can send you the link to the book in that anyway, and you can send that to people. And yeah, how many people read it? You know, leave me a review, and if you want to get in touch. We can certainly discuss things further. You know, but I think it's just, you know, I guess my parting thing would be, you know, it's in your hands now. You know, and you're in a dangerous place, you know, employment wise. You're in a dangerous place from the whole occupation point of view. You know, there's an agenda and you need to get up with it because they're using your niceness against you. Just like they do with nurses.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's why nurses
Yeah.
haven't had a pay rise since I can remember.
Well, you know, the
Pay rise,
conscience
but
thing and all that
exactly,
stuff
they're using that against
yeah,
you. So
yeah,
sometimes you've got to be
yeah.
nasty. Yeah, the
Well,
nurses have finally got to the point of walking out after decades. Even if the government give them a decent pay rise, they're still in pocket because you ain't had a decent pay rise for 20 years. You know, so they've won anyway.
Yeah.
You're never going to be where you
Yeah.
should be if you'd have just been a bit nasty at the beginning. But I said to my nurse friends, you're never going to get a pay rise because you're never going to walk out. You're never going to walk out of a ward and leave people there. No government would ever want that. But because they know you will never do it, they don't need to give you a pay rise. Why would they give you a pay rise? And it's the same with social workers. They don't need to treat you well because you're not going to do anything. You know, you're not going to do anything. So you've got to change the way you do it. You've got to change your approach.
All right. Thank you, Dave.
You want lessons in putting the boot in? Come and see me.
Yeah, I'll bear that one in mind. All right, Dave. Well, thank you so much. And you've obviously left us with a lot to think about. And if we do want lessons, we will definitely come and speak with you.
I don't charge a lot either.
I bet you don't. Oh,